Hello, my name is Claudia Wert, Executive Director of the Christus Vincit Foundation, and you're listening to the Christus Vincit Foundation podcast. And today we are joined by Father DeRosa of St. Mary's in Washington, D.C. Thank you so much for coming on the program.
Hey, Claudia, good to be with you.
So why don't you introduce yourself and tell our listeners how you came to be interested in the Latin Mass?
So my name is Father Vincent DeRosa, and as you said, I'm the pastor here at St. Mary, Mother of God Parish in downtown DC. And I'm originally from New York. I came to Washington to study foreign affairs because I thought that I had a career in front of me in the foreign service. And then God called me to divine service instead. So I discerned a call and entered the seminary for this diocese, and served about half of my ministry now in the suburbs, and now the more recent half here in the city. And I was at a parish kind of in the inner city and got a call one day from the vicar for clergy, the priest in charge of priests. And he said to me, the pastor at St. Mary's is really quite beyond ready to retire. And he said, but you know the extraordinary form, right? And I said, no. And he said, would you be willing to learn? I said, yes. I have a good ear, and I love church history, and I love aesthetics as part of the study of theology and so on. So I was excited to say yes to the assignment and to learning the extraordinary form of the Roman Rite with it. And it's been a beautiful opportunity to do a couple of things. One is to deepen my knowledge of this part of our history and our culture, to help that inform all of the other things that I've learned as a seminarian, now as a priest, to be able to expose our people to that, right? Because everything that came before enriches and colors what we have now, right? And pastorally speaking, one of the really exciting things about ministering in the extraordinary form right now is, well, a couple things. One, I think I'm the first priest here to excitedly and proactively jump at this. Previous pastors in our history have done it, but it was something that, might have been, well, I'll do it because I was asked to, or I'll do it because it needs to be done, but it's not really my bag,
So this is a real joy for you.
Yeah, and but it also represents a beautiful kind of generational shift in the church, I think. And this is one of the things I talked to my folks about. I said, ministry in the extraordinary form should not be something that's sort of ghettoized. It is a normal part of being a normal member of the church. And I think one of the challenges that has so beleaguered devotees of the extraordinary form is that feeling of being marginalized, but to be able to have all of the sacraments in a normal diocesan parish as part of a normal course of life, no big deal in a sense, helps people feel like part of the family, So that's been a very exciting thing pastorally, is to help people here realize that they are part of the diocesan family, and to help people in other parts of the diocese realize that St. Mary's is part of the family. And that's a beautiful thing, because priests are pontifexes. We're supposed to be bridge builders. And that's been a great gift.
Exactly. It's so interesting how you're able to give them that sense of continuity within the church. Yeah. So St. Mary's is one of the more historic parishes in Washington, D.C. Can you tell us about its roots?
Yeah, it's got beautiful roots. St. Mary's was founded at the request of General Van Ness, who was, among other things, a real estate developer in Washington in the 19th century. And nobody was buying his land. So his wife said to him, he lamented to her, he said, why is it that nobody from the old country is coming over to buy these plots of land, these houses that we're going to build, etc.? And she said, well, maybe if they could go and speak to a priest in their own language, maybe if there was a place where they could have Mass and the sacraments, but also all of their cultural observances as German speakers, they would be more enticed to come. Because, Washington has never really been a Catholic city, not like New York or Philadelphia or Boston, right? So Van Ness sought the permission of the Archbishop of Baltimore. We were part of that diocese then. And he was given a piece of land, and he built the church and brought over a priest from Switzerland, Father Matthias Allig. And Father Allig actually, he gave up everything, and including his family's inheritance. They were kind of minor, I don't want to say minor nobility, but they were landowners, you know. And he did that so that in addition to the church, which Van Ness had built, he could build one day an orphanage, a convent, a school, etc. So this beautiful, beautiful founding pastor. So the German-speaking community was served here from the foundation in 1845 until 1890, when Father Glaub, another native German who came here to be pastor, who incidentally got one of the first doctorates ever given by Catholic University of America.
Interesting.
Yeah, Father Glaub built the present church, the stone church. And I think he died at the age of 37. He was named pastor here very young and built this beautiful church. No expense was spared. And by the German community to do this, to the honor of Our Lady. And when a fever gripped the city, Father Glaub was visiting the parishioners, as is his job, you know, and he was ministering to a parishioner who was dying, and he caught the fever himself, and it killed him. Wow. So it's something we're thinking of right now in a particular way with the pandemic. I've been praying with Father Glaub a lot lately.
That has some interesting repercussions.
Yeah. But, you know, his death at a young age came loving his people, and after having built a whole new church, you know, for them to take them into another period of their history, remained a German parish after Father Glaub all the way up until World War I. And as you might imagine, after World War I, it was not really popular to be German. It became difficult. In fact, it was so difficult that the city government here in Washington exiled the pastor at the time. Father Roth was the last of the German-born pastors of the church, and an ordinance was passed that non-citizen German-born Americans had to leave the city during World War I. Yeah, because their loyalty was being questioned and so on. And it was terribly hard for him because he had actually been in the middle of, in this period, adorning the church. So Father Glaub left him with an interior with wooden decorations, and Father Roth installed the floor mosaics, the marble altar rail, some new statuary in the altar, and so on. So he came back at the end of the war and returned to his post and served another 3 years as pastor before he died. But after that, St. Mary's had English-speaking pastors. And ministry began to shift so that by the 1930s, they really needed a new focus. German culture was no longer the principal focus of the parish. And the parish settled on, and it's interesting, we have a couple of Marian shrines in the church that show the pastor's search for a focus. So,
interesting.
For example, there's a shrine to Our Lady Perpetual Help, but people really didn't take to it. So, okay, so the shrine is there, but it's kind of just thrown into the corner, you know.
Imagine not taking to a version of Our Lady.
Well, eventually they did. They settled on Our Lady of the Miraculous Medal. And at its height, 10,000 people a week would come to this church for the Miraculous Medal novena observances. And that was principally during wartime, when the mothers of the city would come by their thousands on their knees to pray before Our Lady of the Miraculous Medal for their boys who were overseas. So yeah, and the Miraculous Medal really sustained the parish up till the 80s, when the Latin Mass community found a home here, when the Chinese Mass community found a home here in Cantonese. Plus there was a smaller English community. The neighborhood had really been hollowed out by economic depression.
That makes sense.
And now we still have these two beautiful communities, the Latin Mass community, the Chinese Mass community, and now with a restored Washington, we have a local population that lives here of young adults, government workers, grad students, who have brought a whole verve to the place of their own. So it's got a really rich, beautiful history, this parish. And it's always been a place that has served people who maybe wouldn't have found a home otherwise, you know? And I think that's something we can really look to with pride.
So speaking of younger generations moving in, do you find that there's a large growth in popularity for the Latin Mass among younger people?
I would say that the population of people involved in the Latin Mass is predominantly young. And they have an interest in this. Now, part of that is also that the neighborhood around us is predominantly young. What the saying is, you know, when they get married, start the clock, because as soon as they have their first child, they have to find a house instead of an apartment, you know? So, but no, the predominant group that we have is young adults and young families. There are older folks, of course, but with the proliferation of extraordinary form masses in the surrounding regions around the city, sometimes it's easier for the older folks to go where they're closer to home.
That makes sense.
Yeah. So, but there's definitely a youth component, and I think it speaks to the young because, you know, they're the classical transcendentals, right? Truth, goodness, and beauty, right? Truth, people are having issues with. We've been having issues with truth for 400 years, and it's only gotten worse recently. Goodness is hard. People have a hard time with goodness sometimes, right? They struggle with goodness. But beauty gets under the radar. Beauty gets past all of the devil's assaults and touches the human heart in a convincing way. And the particular developed beauty of the extraordinary form has that. You know, it's kind of a prepackaged deal. You know, it has been proven to be beautiful. The ordinary form is beautiful also, but it's new and it's still working out some of its kinks. And you know, one day it'll be there also. So that, and as Pope Benedict always wanted us to do, here at St. Mary's, the ordinary and the extraordinary mutually inform and enrich each other. And that's something that we're very proud of.
That's a beautiful way of putting it. And speaking about one piece that's particularly beautiful at your parish, the 1891 Hutchings pipe organ.
Yes.
Can you tell us a little bit about its history and significance to the community?
It was built by the parishioners at the time of Father Glaub, when the church was built, so it's 130 years old. It is what we call a manual tracker organ, meaning...
You'll have to walk us through that a little bit.
The only electricity in the whole thing is the blower down in the basement that pushes the air. Everything else is mechanical. So when the organist pulls one of the stops, what happens is the stop pulls a lever, pulls a string, which activates a pipe.
Interesting.
Yeah, picture Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. Remember that and there are little creatures inside kind of pulling and moving things. That's us. And it was really cool. Well, what's happened is, you might not realize it, but pipe organs have, first of all, tens of thousands of pieces in them. And some of these pieces are very, very small and very, very fine. So for example, when you pull a stop, what it's pulling on is actually a strip of wood. If you can imagine a strip of wood about 1/4 of an inch wide and flat, like a fettuccine noodle, but rigid, you know, because it's made of wood. It pulls that, and then that actually then activates a series of other levers, but these are tiny, tiny pieces. The pipes themselves sit on these little feet, as it were, that are made of materials like leather, felt, very fine wood or tin, right? And so over the course of 130 years, as you can imagine, leather dries out, felt cracks and breaks. Some of these things snap at some point, right? That we had an earthquake here in DC about 10 or 13 years ago, which caused some of the pipes to lean because the pipe sits on the foot, and the foot was crushed as the pipe began to move, right? So after over a century, you need a little TLC, and all those manual bits and pieces need to be maintained, and that's what we've been doing.
So that sounds like a complicated project. What specific actions are needed to restore the instrument?
Well, the actions are actually already underway. We're digging into our savings to make it happen, because what happened was, in parish projects, when you're doing a parish project, you have to do a lot of research, and you have to get multiple bids to make sure that you're doing things right. So I received a report when I got here 3 years ago from one company saying the organ needed work. Fair enough. But you can't just go with one company because you want to make sure you're getting a good competitive price and so on. So we then had to take time to bring in multiple other companies and then make a decision as to which of those we wanted to work with, seek the appropriate approvals, and all this takes time. And what happened was, during the pandemic, during the lockdown, we started to notice last winter that more and more little pops and squeaks were becoming obvious when the instrument was played. So we got permission for emergency work and brought in Lewis and Hitchcock, a well-renowned firm here on the East Coast, to completely disassemble the instrument. Every single piece. Oh, you should have seen it. They brought in these amazing pallets that stacked one on top of the other and brought it out one after the other in an endless sort of train of organ bits and pieces, laid out and covered over. And they took them all out to their workshop and began to restore each piece and put in replacement parts and so on. And eventually, after about a month and a half, 2 months of work, they brought it back and started to put everything back together again. So that now we are in the middle of a series of organ concerts in order to showcase the organ, but also to reach out to people, to use this as part of bringing people back into the church, as the pandemic, we hope, wanes in the coming months.
That makes complete sense. So why is sacred music so important for the liturgy?
Well, it's a constituent part of the liturgy, right? All of our teaching documents in the church remind us of this. This is the constant teaching of the church, but it has been particularly enunciated since the time of St. Pius X, all the way up until now, in the time of Pope Francis. And it's anybody, speaking is natural, right? So any natural element in the world can speak. But to sing is to take what is natural and elevate it to a higher level. And that's the whole motif of what the church does. We take what is natural. We take water, the most common natural element on earth, and we elevate it to use it in baptism. We take common bread and wine and elevate them into the stuff of the Blessed Sacrament. Likewise, all of the other things in the church, even light in the church, right, does not enter in its natural form. It passes through stained glass, so that it's different. It's in a sense special, right?
Makes sense.
Yeah, likewise, our voices, aided by instruments, are lifted into sacramentals, as it were. That's why sacred music is critically important in the life of the church.
That makes complete sense. A very interesting, eloquent way of putting it.
Well, thank you.
Now, there are several other renovation projects at St. Mary's. Would you mind telling us about the effort to restore the side altar apses?
Yeah.
And I think we could start out with explaining for the audience what an altar apse is.
Sure. An apse is a niche. Okay, it's if you look at any church, right, the half dome, as it were, that the altar sits under is called an apse, right? And then on either side of it, you'll often have the Mary altar and the Joseph altar, right? Each of those niches with a little half dome on top of it is called an apse, right?
Sounds like a very niche fact.
It's a very niche fact, yes. What happened was, during that time when there were so many people coming to the church for the miraculous medal. We have photos of thousands of candles being lit throughout the day. In fact, at one point, the Lady Altar, where the miraculous medal is there on the wall, the Lady Altar was actually completely covered over by a pyramid of marble. And on the steps of this pyramid, you had just hundreds and hundreds of candles and flowers and different votive gifts that people left as part of the miraculous medal devotion. Well, candles, until relatively recently, burned black smoke and didn't always smell so great. And so a ventilation system had to be brought into the church to suck out all of this smoke. The other thing is that in Washington in the summer, worship without any kind of ventilation, not something you want to be part of. So essentially what they did was in the 30s, I believe it was, the 30s, or it might have been even the 40s during the war, they took the two small rondel windows, and by rondel's another word for like a rose window, little itty bitty rose window over the Mary altar and over the Joseph altar. They took those out and installed fans where they were, and then put in sort of a superstructure that filled up the top half of each apse with vent work and duct work, right? So that when they turned on these fans, they could suck up all the smoke, and the pleasant byproduct was that if you opened the back doors of the church, it would pull air through the whole church, creating a primitive sort of air conditioning.
One could see how that's appealing.
One can see how that's appealing. If you've ever been in the congregation or seen, if you've ever seen me say Mass anytime between May and November, the sweat just, it's terrible. So they did this, but the negative side, the con to the whole thing, is that half of these apses was filled up with ductwork, and the windows were lost. So what we are proposing to do, is to demo out all of that ductwork. The altars below have already been restored by my predecessor. So they are now functioning for special devotional masses and so on and so forth. What we propose to do is to complete what they could not, which is demo out all of this ductwork, restore the original architectural shape of these apses, and very blessedly, we still have one of the two rondel windows. And that window is of St. Raphael, the healer. Now, we know that over our baptistry, there is a similar window of St. Gabriel, the archangel, right? So we are presuming, therefore, that the missing one, the third one, must have been Michael. And so we are working with our architect to contact the original manufacturer of the stained glass in our church in Innsbruck, in Austria, to have a copy made of the Michael window. So we will really be restoring these windows to their original glory, repairing them, putting them all back up in, and in addition to restoring the original integrity of the apses, what this will do is to let in a whole new source of light into the church. Because in our church, we face east, and so in the morning when the sun comes up, when you're at Mass on Sunday, for example, there's supposed to be light streaming through these windows onto the people from the altars. And so that's kind of our goal.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
So would you mind telling us what, or potential donors, what the dollar amount for these two projects is?
Sure. The restoration of the organ is about $69,000. And it's gone remarkably well. The restoration of the apses, which is not yet begun, is going to be between $120,000 and $130,000. And in addition to the apses, what that will cover also is the complete repainting of the whole sanctuary. Why is that important? Because as I mentioned, there have been multiple restoration works done. In fact, in the 70s, the whole church was painted white. So in the 90s, a major restoration was undertaken. But the point is that there's a patchwork, right, in the church now. And what we want to do is to unify the whole sanctuary. Everything behind the altar rail will be unified on one schema of color and design, taking notes from the original 1890 design. It won't be as ornate as that Victorian design, but taking the notes and giving a nod toward that, taking colors from the main vault of the church, which is the only part that's original that remains, that you can see. And then one day, with all this work done, we will begin work restoring the side walls according to the same interpretive scheme, right? Using that same color scheme. So what we're doing now is not just about these projects, it's also giving us a definitive key for future projects that we're going to be working on for the total restoration of our church with, just TLC that it needs after all these years.
And just to note, donors can fund these two projects through a page on the Christus Vincit Foundation website, which we'll be making available.
Yeah, we're really grateful for your assistance. In addition to the structural work, this is deeply evangelical. And what do I mean by that? I'll give you an example. During the lockdown, before we even began the emergency work on the organ, when nobody was allowed into any of the public institutions in Washington, including churches, what we were allowed was to have 10 people to do whatever, a baptism, 10 people for a funeral, 10 people for a wedding, etc. So on multiple occasions, what we chose to do during the lockdown was to have those 10 people be musicians, professional sacred musicians, who we could therefore help keep employed. And we opened up the doors of the church, all the doors in the front of the church, and told people that they could pass down the sidewalk, stand outside, whatever, and played the organ and sang, like we sang Vespers, I think it was for St. Joseph. We had a number of evenings of sacred music that were meant to allow people to hear something in a very dark and troubling time that would lift them, Now, people, other pastors look at me and they say, you started a capital campaign in the middle of a pandemic. Are you insane? But our attitude is this. Our people have been faithful to us throughout this, So we shouldn't just assume that they're going to stop being faithful in the middle of it, right? Furthermore, if we can pull this off, and I think we can, we're moving in a good direction. If we can pull this off, then what we will have done in the middle of the darkest chapter of the church's history is to undergo a massive renovation and restoration project when everybody else was closed down, right? I walked past an Episcopalian church yesterday, and this is not to gloat on anything, but there's a comment, there's a note to be made here, right? They had a big sign outside, and it said, by order of the Episcopalian Bishop of Washington, all churches shall remain completely closed. There shall be no worship services, no services of any kind here until after the pandemic is over. I can't even imagine, right? It just blew my mind.
That's inconceivable.
Yeah. So here at St. Mary's, we've not only been open, we've been completely and totally functional at every stage, in 3 languages, no less, in Cantonese and Latin and in English. And not only have we been completely open and functional, we're building, we're laying groundwork for. And I think that when I've been telling our people, tell this story, because when you tell this story, people will say, clearly something special is going on there. I want to be part of that. And that is what we call evangelization.
That makes complete sense. And you're right. Like, what better time than during the pandemic to really show, the grace of God through all this? Yeah.
Well, and look, the Lord sends us crosses, and we bear them. And if the cross that he sends, and this is a pleasant cross, is restore rebuild my church, then we do that, just like
that is one of the more pleasant crosses, isn't it?
Yeah, well, it has its challenges, let me tell you, but it's a joy. It really is a joy.
So how could someone contact you to ask more questions about this project?
So folks can go to our webpage, which is very simple, Saint, fully spelled out, SAINT, Saint Mary, Mother of God So you can contact me through the website. You can write to us. Our address is there. There's also a link there that you can click to ask questions by email, and we'll be happy to be in touch. And our phone number is also there. You can call us here on the office line. But we're happy to answer questions. And by the way, as part of our construction, because people have asked this question, and it's a worthy question, people want to know if 100% of what they give to these projects remains here at the parish and only here at the parish. And that is the absolute truth. 100%, every penny given to this construction stays here and only here. Under the law of the church, if you say, Father, I'm giving you a directed gift, to use for church restoration work, I am only allowed to use it for church restoration work. So people can rest assured that that's what this is being used for. And all of it is regularly reviewed with our finance council, our parish council, and then I always talk about all of these things regularly with our congregation, because that's the only way this all works, if there's good transparency.
That's a great reassurance. And I think especially now people are looking for that sense of transparency.
Yeah, well, and I was talking with somebody a couple of months ago, and I said, there's nothing to hide here. What do we, you can come and see, you can come and look, please, just, in fact, we just gave out our mid-year financial report. And I always say to people, if you have any questions, put them in writing, we'll make an appointment, we'll bring the accountant in, we'll sit down, you can ask all the questions you want, because it's the people's money and they have a right to that.
Completely agreed. So let's move on to our final question, which is kind of a fun one. What special events does St. Mary's host over the course of a year, supposing we're post-COVID? Because I was a huge fan of the Blessed Karl of Austria Mass.
Well, I'll tell you, don't say post-COVID, because we've done it all during COVID. So for example, we celebrated the entire Triduum this past year in the extraordinary form, as is our custom. There were some things that had to be trimmed down and so on, but my brother priests and I did it, and it went off. Why? Because that's what we do, right? We celebrated the Mass of Blessed Karl. We had to have fewer people because of the city restrictions, but it happened, as it does every year. And it was beautiful because, we didn't have as many people, but it was more intimate. There was greater chance for more questions to be asked at the outdoor reception afterwards, or so on, right? We host, like last year, we hosted, I think we had something like 4,000 people pass through our church for Mass on Pro-Life Day, the day of the Pro-Life March.
Wow.
Yeah, Washington really becomes a city. It's kind of like Rome, like when Pro-Life Day happens, all the churches are open, people are constantly coming in and out. There were various points in the day where we had 3 and 4 Masses going on at once, at each of the different side altars and at the main altar. I think we counted about 4,000 people passed through the doors last Pro-Life Day. This year, even though the Pro-Life March was canceled, there were still people who came to town to pray and to make their annual pilgrimage, as it were, and we were here for them. So we hosted not only our events here, like the famous Nellie Gray Mass, in honor of the woman who founded the march, but we helped a new up-and-coming student group, Catholics for Social Action, to have a Mass on Capitol Hill. So we brought our expertise in the extraordinary form. St. Joseph's on Capitol Hill provided their space, and the student group provided the people, and we were able to have Mass at the Church of the Senate, the Catholic Church, across the street from the Senate and across the street from the Supreme Court, to pray for the celebration of life in all of its stages, right?
So beautiful.
Yeah, well, we keep rolling with it. I was formed in Rome. I went to the North American College. And one of the things that you discover looking at the whole history of the church is that when there were earthquakes and the church fell over, you know what the priest did? He cleared off the altar of the rubble and he said Mass the next morning outside. When John Vianney got to ours and there was no roof because the revolution had burned down the roof of the church, right? John Vianney built a new roof and he started saying Mass at the church. I mean, you just keep on going. And so pandemic does not stop us. It can't stop us any more than, you may find this in Pennsylvania. People will call when there's snow and they say, oh, Father, is Mass canceled? I said, no, Mass is never canceled. That's why I live here. So that I can walk across the alleyway and say Mass, even if it's just me and the angels. It happens, you know. So we find a way. So
I like that spirit of persistence.
Yeah, there's a lot of special stuff that happens here. Wonderful concerts of sacred music throughout the year, all of our Masses. We're getting ready to start a Marian procession in May from our parish to our neighboring parish of Immaculate Conception. We're working on that collaboratively. The goal is to say to downtown DC, the church is still here, it is alive and well, and the doors are open and the arms are open to welcome you back if it's been a year since you were last in.
Well, I look forward to having you on again in a few months to discuss that project as well.
Excellent, thank you.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Father DeRosa. It was a real pleasure to have you on and to hear about everything that's going on at St. Mary's.
Claudia, it's an absolute pleasure.
Thank you so much. Again, you all have been listening to the Christus Vincit Foundation podcast. I'm Claudia Wert, Executive Director, and I hope you have a blessed day.